He spoke once, and nothing in me was the same. Not because I heard him clearly. I was on a mat, outside, below everything. The ground was cold and hard, the same ground I had known for years. I couldn't remember the color of the sky anymore. I only knew the texture of this room, the dampness, the shadows, the small window that let in light I could not reach. My legs wouldn't move. They hadn't moved in so long that I'd stopped asking them to. They were just part of the room now, part of the floor, part of the forgetting. When you lie in the same place long enough, you stop being a person who wants to stand. You become someone who has accepted that standing is not your story. Then I heard them. Footsteps, not walking past, walking toward. My friends. I knew their voices before I knew what they were saying. The way they spoke to each other. Quick, certain, like men carrying something precious, or something desperate. There was urgency in it. Urgency I hadn't heard directed at me in years. Years of pity had a different sound. This was different. "We're going to him," one of them said. Going, moving, toward something. I was still on the mat, but something inside me, something I thought had died, began to stir. I tried to ignore it. Stirring was dangerous. Stirring meant hope, and hope was the cruelest thing that could happen to someone like me. The air around the house began to change. People were arriving, many of them. I could hear the crowd gathering outside, voices stacking on. Voices. The sound of expectation. The sound of a gathering. I had heard crowds before, in the marketplace, in the streets, always moving, always away from me. But this crowd was moving toward. The footsteps of my friends grew louder. Then, the sound of construction. Not careful, not quiet, not respectful. Digging, ripping. The ancient plaster and wood above me were being torn open like flesh, like something precious was being broken to reach something more precious beneath. Dust began to fall. Pieces of the roof. The sun breaking through where there had only been shadow. The temperature changed. I was being lifted, not by my own strength, by theirs. The mat beneath me rose. I was moving, not because my legs could carry me, but because they refused to let me stay behind. The world tilted. Light poured in from every direction now. I saw the brightness first, then I heard it, the crowd's sudden silence, a collective breath, then a silhouette. Someone standing below me, in the midst of that frozen crowd. Someone whose presence had stopped them all from moving, from speaking, from anything but witnessing. I didn't understand yet, but something in me knew. He was there. He was there, and I was about to meet him in a way I couldn't refuse, couldn't prepare for, couldn't control. But what he said next, no one was ready to hear. Not the crowd, not his enemies, not even his closest friends. If these encounters mattered to you, if you want to keep listening when he speaks, subscribe and remain with us. Where are you listening from? Write your city or country in the comments. His voice reaches farther than we imagine. I had learned to live in the small. The room had 4 walls, 1 window, a door that opened to let people in, and a door that closed to keep the world out. This was my geography. This was my entire map of what it meant to exist. I had explored every inch of it. The texture of the walls, the way the light moved, the exact spot where the plaster had begun to crack 3 winters ago. Days came and went. I watched them pass through the light that moved across the floor. Morning light, noon light, evening light. The sun traveled the whole world, and I traveled 3 feet. The distance from one wall to the other, measured by my eyes alone. I had learned to tell time by the angle of that light. When it touched the corner of my mat, I knew it was past noon. When it left the room entirely, I knew the day was over. I had become a sundial, a thing that marked time without living through it. My legs were stone. I remember when they stopped being mine. There was a moment. I don't think I can explain it. when I realized I was no longer waiting for them to work. I was just waiting. Waiting for what? I didn't know anymore. Waiting had become the only thing I was still active enough to do. The paralysis hadn't come suddenly. It had come like slow water filling a room. First, the numbness in my feet, then the heaviness in my legs, then the realization that heaviness had become permanent. The doctors had come. They had spoken Latin words that meant nothing. They had touched me and pronounced me broken. My mother had wept. My father had looked away. And then, after weeks of prayers that went unanswered, everyone had accepted that this was simply what I was now. A man who couldn't move. The people who cared for me moved carefully around my body. They would lift me. This was the only time I felt the world respond to my existence, and even that was an act of charity. They would wash me, position me so the pressure wouldn't create wounds that wouldn't heal. I had learned the careful pressure points of my own body through the pain of lying still. My left hip, my shoulders, the back of my head. These places knew pain the way a musician knows his instrument. Their faces showed pity. Pity is a kind of love, I suppose, but it's also a kind of death. When someone looks at you with pity, they are seeing what you've lost, not what you still are. They see the gap between what you should be and what you've become, and that gap becomes the only true thing about you. It swallows everything else. I still was, but I was becoming less sure of it. The market sounds came through the window. Voices, commerce, laughter, children running, the sound of feet on stone. The world moved in its ordinary way, buying, selling, arguing, embracing. All of it happened without me. It happened past me, like a river flowing around a stone. I was fixed. The world was fluid, and I watched from my place of stillness, listening to a life I would never live. I learned the sounds by heart, the baker's voice, the woman who sold fish, the children who played near the house, the footsteps of men hurrying to work before dawn. These were my companions, these disembodied voices. I knew them better than I knew my own family because they asked nothing of me. They didn't pity me. They didn't see me. They simply existed in the world I could no longer enter, and I listened from my exile. Sometimes people would come. Neighbors, relatives. They would stand near me and speak about me as though I couldn't hear. How long has it been? Years. Does he ever speak? Only when necessary. I was becoming a thing rather than a person, a condition rather than a man. I was becoming the kind of person you speak about rather than to, and the strange thing was, I had stopped objecting. I had stopped trying to be seen. The nights were worse. When the light left, I had nothing to follow. No sun to mark the hours, just darkness and my own thoughts. Thoughts that circled like animals trapped in a cage. Why am I still here? What am I? What good is a body that doesn't move? What good is a life that isn't lived? If no one speaks to me, do I still exist? I would lie there and listen to the sounds of the city settling into sleep, the shutters closing, the animals being brought inside, the last conversations of the day. And then, silence. A silence so complete that it felt like the world had simply forgotten me. Like I had already died and no one had bothered to bury me. I prayed sometimes. The prayers felt like words I was supposed to say, not words I believed. I would form them in my mouth, petitions to a God who seemed very far away and very disinterested in the man on the mat. My father had taught me to pray. My mother had sung prayers to me as a child, but that was before. Before I became something prayer couldn't reach. Before I became the kind of person God would turn away from. I tried to remember what it felt like to believe that God was near. I couldn't remember. Years, accumulated like dust. I stopped counting them. Years become meaningless when each day is identical to the last. Mondays, Tuesdays, Sabbaths, they were just words, just sounds. They meant nothing to someone who existed outside of time, outside of progress, outside of hope. I stopped asking the people who cared for me questions. I stopped looking at the window with expectation. I stopped imagining what it would feel like to stand, to walk, to move through the world with a body that obeyed. Those imaginations were small murders. Each one killed something in me. So I stopped killing myself. I accepted. I became very good at acceptance. I became very good at the smallness. I learned every detail of my room, every crack in the plaster, every stain on the floor, every sound that marked the rhythm of days I did not create. I was a prisoner who had accepted his cell so thoroughly that he had stopped remembering the word free. I was a boat that had stopped struggling against the current and simply let it carry me, down, always down, into deeper water. This was my life, not living, just remaining, and I had made peace with it, or so I thought. There was a day, I don't remember which one because all days were the same, when I understood that I was a problem, not a person with a problem itself. My mother had stopped singing. At first, she would hum while she cared for me. Old songs from her childhood, songs about love and harvest and the goodness of God. But the humming had gradually faded. One day, I realized I hadn't heard her voice in weeks. She came to see me less often. When she did, her eyes were red. She would touch my arm, gently, say nothing, and leave. I understood. My existence was causing her pain. My father had stopped visiting altogether. There had been a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Through the wall, I had heard him speaking to my uncle. "How much longer?" he had asked. Not, "How much longer until he walks?" But, "How much longer until—" The question had hung unfinished in the air between them. I had understood perfectly what he meant. The care that came to me was efficient and kind, but it was also duty. I was someone's obligation. The young man who came to help move me, was it his son? He would hold his breath while lifting me, as if my body carried disease, as if proximity to me might infect him with the same curse. I was becoming a reason for other people's suffering. My sister hadn't married. I knew this too. The young man she had been walking with, I'd heard his voice once, heard him laugh, had stopped coming. Someone had explained it to my father. Family obligation. She couldn't leave. Who would care for their brother? Who would manage a household while a man lay motionless on a mat, consuming resources, taking up space, reminding everyone that life could betray you? What man would want to marry into that? I had taken her future. This knowledge lived in my chest like a stone, like something that had calcified there years ago and would never dissolve. I tried to pray once. Really pray, not the empty words I formed out of habit. I tried to ask God for mercy, but the prayer caught in my throat because I didn't know what I was asking for. Healing? That seemed like asking for a miracle that God would never grant to someone like me. Someone broken beyond repair. Someone guilty. Death? That felt like a betrayal of my family, even though, and I knew this was true, my death would free them. They could explain it as God's will. They could mourn me, and then move on. My sister could marry. My father could stop carrying the weight of a son who was no longer a son, just a burden. So I asked for nothing. And nothing was what I received. I watched myself disappear. Not physically. My body was still there, still breathing, still requiring the minimum to survive. But the person I had been was becoming faint. The boy who had run through the streets of Capharnaum. The young man who had worked. At what? I could barely remember now. The someone who belonged to a future. All of it was fading like a painting left too long in the sun. The colors were washing out. The image was becoming illegible. I was becoming illegible. I had sinned. I was certain of it. Even though I couldn't remember the exact moment, the exact transgression, I knew there was something that had called down this punishment. People whispered sometimes. The sick whispered it to each other. The broken understood it without speaking. The blind understood it. The paralyzed understood it most of all. The sick were always sick because of sin. The broken were broken because God had broken them. It was the order of the world. It was justice. The righteous walked. The guilty lay still. I was guilty. I didn't even need to know what I had done. The fact of my paralysis was evidence enough. My body was my confession. My stillness was my punishment. This was what God thought of me. This was what the universe had decided about my worth. The shame was the heaviest thing I carried. Heavier than my useless legs. Heavier than the permanent ache in my shoulders and back. Heavier than the weight of my entire body. Pressing down on the mat, day after day, year after year. The shame was internal. It had become my skeleton. It held me together and held me down. Every glance that fell on me felt like an accusation. Every whispered conversation felt like judgment. Look at him. See what happens when you sin. See what happens when God decides you're not worth saving. They were right to judge me. I was right to accept it. I became very quiet, not just in voice, in my entire being. I stopped asking for things. I stopped wanting things. I stopped being a self that had desires or opinions or preferences. I became a kind of absence, a space in a room where a person used to be. I was a negative, a blank, the opposite of life moving through me. I was very good at this dying while still breathing, and then the rumors came. Someone was healing people. At first I didn't listen. Rumors were the only currency in my prison, and most of them were lies. But this one persisted. A man, a voice, sick people, became well. Broken people, not all of them, but some, became whole again. He wouldn't heal someone like me. I knew this with absolute certainty. If there were healers, and the rumors said there was one, he would heal the worthy, the faithful, the ones who deserved it, the ones whose sickness wasn't their own fault, not someone like me, not someone whose very existence was proof of his unworthiness, not someone God had already rejected. The thought of approaching him felt obscene, even if he looked at me, he would turn away. This was what I understood about God, about the world, about justice. The guilty stayed broken. The unworthy stayed invisible. This was simply how things were. The law was written in my body. The judgment was final. I had made my peace with it. I had. But something inside me, something very small, something I had tried to kill 1,000 times, still whispered a question in the dark. A question I had no right to ask. And if he speaks? What if he said something to me? What against all logic, against all shame, against all evidence that I was not worth saving? What if he spoke my name? I tried to push the question down, but it was already there, and it wouldn't leave me alone. The first time I heard his name, I didn't believe it. A woman had come. The wife of the man who brought water sometimes. She was speaking to my caregiver. Her voice was different, not the careful, pitying tone people used when speaking to me, but something else, something alive, something that vibrated with a kind of electric urgency. "Have you heard?" she said. "Heard what?" "There's a man, in Galilee. They say he—" She trailed off, as if the words themselves were too large for her mouth, as if saying them out loud might either confirm something miraculous or expose something absurd. "He what?" my caregiver asked. "He speaks. And they change. That was all. Just rumors. Just the kind of story that moves through a village like water through cracks, seeping, spreading, becoming both less and more true the farther it travels. In Capharnaum, everyone had stories. Stories were cheaper than bread, but this one had a different weight to it. I didn't think about it. I told myself I didn't. But something in me had heard it. Something that wasn't quite dead yet. Something small and frightened and dangerous. Something that had learned not to hope, but couldn't help itself. A week passed. Or two. Time moved differently now. It moved in rumors. Another voice. A man from the market. He was speaking to my father. I heard through the wall, my ear pressed against the plaster, listening to conversations not meant for me. The teacher from Nazareth, the one they're calling. They say, he healed a man, a leper, just spoke to him and the sickness fell away like old skin. A leper. The word sat in my mind, heavy and strange. Somehow that made it less real. Lepers were different. They were cursed in ways that were visible. Their sickness was written on them, obvious to everyone. People could see the reason for their isolation. Lepers were the kind of people the world could justify saving. There was something pure about their suffering, pure in its obviousness, pure in its visibility. Was not a leper. My sickness was interior. My shame was invisible. My paralysis was the result of something, guilt, sin, God's judgment, that lived inside me, not on me. But the story had planted itself in my mind anyway. I couldn't kill it. I tried, but it had taken root. More stories came. They came in fragments, through voices I recognized and voices I didn't. They came like seeds on the wind, and I couldn't keep them out no matter how hard I tried to close myself. A demon cast out. A fever broken. A child brought back from the edge of death. A woman with an issue of blood. 12 years of suffering, healed by just touching his garment. He just speaks, someone said. That's all he does. He speaks, and the word settled in me like a stone in water. My whole life was the opposite of speaking. I was the man who had learned silence. Silence was all I had. Silence and stillness and the accumulation of years where nothing changed except the slow erosion of hope and the slow calcification of acceptance. And this man, this teacher, this healer, whatever he was, he healed through words, through his voice. The thing I had been denying myself the most. Someone who would speak to me. Someone who would say something that mattered. Someone who would see me. The rumors grew more specific. He was coming to Capharnaum. People said it with certainty now. Not maybe or perhaps. He was coming. To this city, to these streets, to this moment. The world was moving towards something. And somehow the current had begun to reach even into my room, even into the stillness I had made my home. My sister came to see me. She hadn't visited in months. Her eyes were different, younger, as if something had been lifted from her, as if she had been carrying a weight and suddenly had permission to set it down. "Did you hear?" she asked. I couldn't speak, but she knew I had heard. My friends. They're saying he's coming here, tomorrow, or the day after. No one knows exactly when, but he's in Capharnaum now. He's here. She stopped, looked at me with something that wasn't pity, something like hope, like possibility, like the resurrection of a feeling she had thought was dead. "What if he came to our house?" she said. The question was so absurd, so impossible that I almost laughed. As if such things were possible, as if the teacher of Nazareth would come to this small house for a broken man on a mat, as if he would waste his power, his time, his presence on someone like me. "He won't," I tried to say, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. She heard me anyway. "You don't know that." And she was right. I didn't know. No one knew what this man would do or wouldn't do. He was breaking the rules of the world. He was healing lepers. He was speaking to women. He was touching the untouchable. He was crossing boundaries that were supposed to be permanent. What if he crossed the boundary between me and salvation? What if he spoke to me? The thought was terrifying. The town began to move. I could hear it from my room. More voices, more footsteps, more energy in the air. The rhythm of Capharnaum was changing. The usual patterns were disrupted. There was urgency in the air. Expectation. The kind of expectation that changes the shape of a day, the shape of a town, the shape of possibility itself. The world outside my window had begun to vibrate with something I had almost forgotten how to recognize. Hope. No, not hope. Possibility. The possibility that the rules I had, accepted as permanent, might not be permanent at all. That the order of the world, guilty stay broken, unworthy stay invisible, might not be the final word. My friends came to see me, the ones who had cared for me all these years. I had barely registered their presence for so long. They were just part of the machinery of my survival. The hands that lifted me, the voices that asked if I needed water. But now I saw them, really saw them. Their faces were lit with something like determination, had decided something. They had made a choice. "We've heard about this teacher," one of them said. "Yes," I said. My voice was barely working. "He heals people." "I know. And he's here, in Capharnaum, right now, in a house not far from here." I didn't respond. I couldn't let myself feel what I was beginning to feel. "What if we took you to him?" another friend said. The suggestion hung in the air. It was so audacious it was almost comic. Take me? How? I couldn't walk. I couldn't be carried far. I weighed nothing but was also everything. An impossibility to move through the world. How would I get to him? How would 3 men carrying a mat full of a paralyzed man push through a crowd of hundreds? How? I asked. We'll find a way. 3 words. And something in me, something that had been dead, something I had murdered and buried and accepted as corpse, began to move. Just barely, just a tremor, just the smallest echo of something that remembered what it felt like to be alive. The rumors became reality. He was at a house, a teacher's house. There was a crowd, hundreds, maybe thousands. The whole city seemed to be gathering, drawn by something they couldn't name. People wanted to see him, to hear him, to stand in the presence of someone who could remake the world with just his voice. And I was still on my mat, still unable to move, still separated from him by walls and crowds and the impossible distance between what I was and what I would need to be, to reach him. But my friends were thinking, planning. Their voices grew lower, more intense. I heard them on the roof of my house. I heard the familiar creaking of the wood above me. They were up there, in the place where I would never go, making a decision that would require courage and a willingness to be seen as foolish. "If we can't get him through the door," one of them said, "we get him through the roof." The simple audacity of it, the utter refusal to accept that anything was impossible, the willingness to destroy a man's home to save his life. "He's coming," my sister whispered, kneeling beside me. Her voice was shaking. "The teacher, he's at the house with the crowd. He's speaking right now. We can hear his voice from here." And I could. Faint, distant, but real. A voice. The voice everyone had been speaking about. The voice that changed things. The voice that made lepers clean and demons flee and the dead rise. My heart was racing. My body was still. But something inside me, something I thought had died, something I had killed deliberately, was waking up and afraid, waking up and desperate, waking up and reaching for something it had no right to reach for. Something was about to happen. I didn't know what. I only knew that the world I had accepted as fixed and final was beginning to move. And I was about to move with it, whether I was ready or not. They came for me at dawn. Or what felt like dawn. Time had become strange. The light outside my window was different. The energy in the air was different. Everything was different because he was different. He was here, in my city, in my world. My friends moved with purpose. "We're taking you to him," one of them said. Not asking, stating it like fact, like something that had already been decided in a place I wasn't part of. I wanted to stop them. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. What would I say? "Don't do this. Don't waste your time. Don't make a fool of yourself trying to carry a broken man through a crowd to meet someone who won't even look at me. He didn't notice me. That was the truth I knew. I was invisible. I had made myself invisible. For years I had perfected the art of taking up as little space as possible, of being as quiet as possible, of existing in a way that didn't disturb anyone. And now, suddenly, my friends wanted to carry me into the presence of a man who healed important people, people worthy of healing. What would he see when he looked at me? He would see the mat. He would see the weight of years. He would see a man whose own body had rejected him. He would see someone God had already rejected, someone already judged and found wanting. He would turn away. My sister was preparing things, moving around the house with a kind of frantic energy, tears in her eyes, hope in her voice. She believed this was going to work. She believed that somehow, impossibly, this teacher would heal me. I couldn't let her believe that. "You should stop," I said. "This is foolish." She didn't listen. They lifted me. The mat shifted. My body, which had been in the same position for so long that the shape of it had become permanent, was suddenly unstable. I felt sick, disoriented. The world tilted at angles I hadn't seen in years. "Easy," one of my friends said. "We have you." But I didn't feel held. I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that went deeper than physical. My body, the thing I had learned to hide, to be ashamed of, to deny, was being carried through the streets. People would see me. People who had stopped looking at me years ago would see me. People who had forgotten I existed would be forced to remember. They would see me being carried like an object, like a thing, like proof of my own failure. I should stop them. I tried again to speak, but my voice was barely a whisper. "Put me down. Please. This is a mistake. We're almost there," another friend said. "Almost where? To humiliation? To public rejection? To the moment when a man with real power looked at me and confirmed what I already knew, that I wasn't worth saving." The crowd sounds were getting louder. We were approaching the house. I could hear the voices now, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All those people, all those eyes, and I was being carried toward them like a corpse, like something to be displayed, like a fool's errand. This was a mistake. Everything in me knew it. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might stop entirely. My palms were wet with sweat. My mind was spiraling through every possible rejection, every possible humiliation. What if the crowd laughed? What if they parted to let us through and then whispered about the men who would waste a teacher's time with someone so obviously beyond help? What if, and this was the thought that terrified me most, what if the teacher himself turned us away? What if he looked at me and said no? I couldn't survive that. I had survived years of slow death, of invisible dying, but I couldn't survive the active rejection of someone who actually had the power to save me. That would be a different kind of death, a death in front of everyone, a death that was public and undeniable. We reached the house. The crowd was enormous, packed tightly. The people who had come to see the healer, to hear him, to witness whatever it was he did. Some of them were sick. I could tell. There was a particular way sick people held themselves, a particular hopelessness in their posture, and some of them were just curious, just there because a rumor had passed through town, and curiosity is a powerful thing. My friends tried to move through. "Excuse us. We need to get through. Please." The crowd didn't budge. People looked at us, at the mat, at me, at three men carrying what was obviously a paralyzed man. I saw the expressions: pity, skepticism. Another desperate family wasting the teacher's time. "We can't get through the door," one of my friends said. Of course we couldn't. The door was clogged with people. The entire house was full. There was no room, no space, no way in. This was the moment. This was where it would end. We would stand here at the edge of the crowd, unable to proceed, and I would be forced to lie here and listen to the teacher speak to people who were worthy of his attention. And my friends would have to explain to their families why they had attempted this foolish thing. And I would have to live with the knowledge that I had been this close to salvation, and it had been impossible to reach. "We go up," one of them said. "What?" another replied. "The roof. We go through the roof." The suggestion hung in the air between them. It was so absurd, so impossible, so flagrantly disrespectful that for a moment nobody spoke. They were going to destroy someone's house, to carry me, a paralyzed man on a mat, up to the roof of a stranger's house and then tear through the ceiling. All of this in front of hundreds of people. All of this so I could be lowered down in front of a teacher who would probably turn away anyway. "No," I said. My voice was stronger now, clearer. "No, you can't do this. This is insane. This is—" But they were already moving. Up the side of the house. There were external stairs. Steps I had forgotten existed in the world. My friends were carrying me up them, the mat tilting at dangerous angles, my body sliding slightly with each movement. Could see the crowd below now. They were looking up. They were watching 3 men carry a paralyzed man up to the roof of a house. My shame was complete. From this height I could see inside the house through the high windows. I could see him. He was sitting, teaching, his back to us. There was something about the way he sat, a kind of stillness, a kind of presence. Even from a distance, even from above, there was something about him that felt different, real in a way that most things weren't real. And I was about to interrupt him. I was about to humiliate him and myself and my friends and the entire crowd by being lowered through the ceiling like some kind of sacrilege. "Wait," I said. "Please, wait." But they were already on the roof. I could feel them assessing the structure, the wood, the thatch, the places where they could pull it apart without the whole thing collapsing. "This will hold," one of them said. "Are you sure?" "No, but we're doing it anyway." And then they began. The sound of tearing, of wood being ripped, of thatch being pulled. Dust began to fall. The noise was impossibly loud. It echoed through the house, through the crowd, through everything. The teacher stopped speaking. I heard it, the sudden silence, the moment when his voice stopped and everyone in that room understood that something had changed. Something was interrupting. Something was breaking the order of things. I was dying of fear. My body couldn't move, but my mind was running through every scenario, every rejection, every moment where this would all fall apart and I would be exposed and destroyed and left with nothing but the memory of my own audacity. The hole in the ceiling appeared. Light poured through. Real light. Direct light. Not the filtered light of my window, but raw sunlight cutting through the dust and revealing everything. And below that light, I could see him. Looking up. The dust was still falling. The hole in the ceiling was a wound in the world, and through it, ropes descended with me tied to a mat like an offering. The crowd gasped. I came down slowly, lowering, descending into the presence of everyone, into the presence of him, and he saw me, not the mat, not the paralysis, not the shame or the impossibility or the audacity of what was happening. He saw me. The crowd was silent. The Pharisees who had been sitting near him, I could see them from this angle, their faces stiff with outrage. A man's roof had been destroyed, the sacred space had been violated, and a paralyzed man was being lowered through it like some kind of sacrilege. He stood, and he spoke. Son. One word, but it landed like something that rewrote the world. Son. Not man. Not paralyzed one. Not unfortunate son. The word that means belonging. The word that means relationship. The word that means I was not a problem to be solved, but a child to be known. I couldn't speak. I could barely. Your sins are forgiven. The words hung in the air, and I understood. In that moment, suspended above the crowd, suspended in the space between the roof and the floor, I understood that he had said something impossible, something theologically scandalous, something that made no sense in the order of the world. My sins, not my legs. My sins, the invisible thing, the thing I had carried in my chest like a stone, the guilt, the shame, the conviction that I was being punished, the deep, unspoken belief that I deserved this. He was speaking to that. He was speaking directly to the thing that had held me more than paralysis ever could. The Pharisees moved. I could hear them. Their outrage was almost physical. "Who does he think he is?" one of them said. "Only God can forgive sins." And the teacher, he looked at them. I could see it from where I hung, the way his eyes met theirs, the way he didn't defend himself, the way he simply acknowledged their confusion. "Which is easier," he said, "to say to the paralyzed man, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Rise, take up your mat and walk'? The words were a mystery, a riddle, an opening. Which is easier? Or to speak something visible, to pronounce forgiveness no one can verify, or to command healing everyone can see, but that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." Son of Man. I didn't fully understand the words, but I understood the structure of them. I understood that he was claiming something about himself, something about his relationship to God, something about power and authority that lived not in physical strength, but in the ability to reorder reality with his voice. He looked at me, not at the Pharisees, not at the crowd, not at the hole in the roof or the evidence of the violation or the impossible thing that had just happened. He looked at me. "Rise." The word was not loud. It was not forceful. It was quiet and clear and absolute. And something in me responded. Not my legs, not yet. Something deeper, something at the core of me that had been lying still for so long that it had forgotten how to move. "Take up your mat." Command. The simple, impossible command. Pick up the thing that has held you, the thing that has defined you, the thing that everyone in this room associates with your paralysis, your shame, your inability. Pick it up and go home. 3 commands, 3 words that rewrote the world. And then the sensation came first. Not pain, not numbness dissolving, but a kind of electricity, a reawakening. My legs, the legs that hadn't moved in years, that I had stopped believing could move, that had become stone and shadow and forgetting. They remembered how to be legs. I couldn't tell you the exact moment when paralysis became possibility, but I felt it the way you feel light after years in darkness. Not gradual, sudden, total. A shift in the fundamental nature of reality. I stood on legs. That shouldn't work. Legs that had no reason to work. Legs that the world had written off as permanently broken. I stood because he had spoken. The crowd, I can't even describe what happened to the crowd. The sound was beyond words. It was the sound of reality being reordered. It was the sound of a man who had been unmade being remade. It was the sound of the impossible becoming ordinary fact. I picked up my mat, the very thing that had defined my existence, the thing that had held me for so long, the thing that had become more real than my own name. I picked it up, and it was light. It was nothing. It was just fibers and wood. It had never had power over me except the power I had given it by lying on it. I walked. Not slowly, not testing each step. Walking. The way people walk when they have legs and gravity and the simple ability to move through the world. The crowd parted. Their faces were shock and wonder and the kind of joy that comes from witnessing something you didn't believe was possible. They had come to see miracles. They had believed in rumors. But now they had seen something that couldn't be unseen. A dead thing made alive. A broken thing made whole. A man who had been written off by the world, remade by a single voice. I walked past them. I didn't look at their faces. I didn't acknowledge their shock or their joy or their disbelief. I was focused on one thing, on the absolute reality of my own body moving, on the fact that my legs were carrying me, on the fact that I could walk. But as I moved, I felt something else, something deeper than the physical healing, something that had happened in the space between his words and my standing, in that space where he had looked at me and said, "Son," and then spoken to something invisible. I was forgiven. I didn't understand it completely. I didn't know the theology of it or the mechanism of it. But I felt it. I felt the stone in my chest, the shame, the guilt, the conviction of unworthiness. I felt it dissolve like it had never been solid at all. I had been healed twice, and the invisible healing was the one that had changed me. If his words reached you, if something inside you recognized his voice, leave a like. It helps these words reach others who are listening. My legs carried me home. That's what I remember most clearly. Not the crowd, not the noise, not even the Pharisees staring in disbelief as I walked past them. What I remember is the simple fact of movement, the weight of my body being held by my own bones and muscles, the rhythm of walking that I had not felt in so long that it seemed like something I was remembering, not something I was doing for the first time since becoming paralyzed. The streets of Capharnaum opened before me. I had seen them from my room. I had heard the sounds of them, but I had never walked them. Not like this. Not as a man who could move through them. Not as a man who belonged to the world of motion. My sister walked beside me. She was crying. Not sad crying, something else. Something that had no name because it was too large to fit into a single emotion. She kept touching my arm as if to confirm I was real, as if I might disappear if she didn't anchor me with her hand. "You're walking," she said, over and over. "You're walking." Yes, I was walking. The mat I carried was light. When I had lain on it, it had been the heaviest thing in the world. It had been the definition of my world. It had been the boundary between me and everything else. But now, carrying it in my hands, it was just fibers and wood. It was nothing. I was not carrying my past. I was carrying proof that my past no longer defined me. People stopped as I passed. They recognized me, or they recognized the change in me, the difference between the man who had lain still for so long and the man who was now walking through their streets. Some of them whispered. Some of them followed for a distance, as if witnessing something they needed to understand. I didn't acknowledge them. I was focused on one thing, the absolute reality of home. The place I had not left in years. The place where I had become a man on a mat. The place where I had died while still breathing. When I reached my house, I stood in the doorway. The doorway I had entered on my own. Legs when I was still whole. The doorway that had become a place I could only imagine leaving. The doorway that was now simply a threshold, a place to cross from one world into another. I crossed it. My mother was there. She had been there the whole time, during all the years, during all the paralysis, during all the slow death. She had been there in the silence and the shame and the acceptance of a fate she couldn't change. And now she was standing in the room where everything had changed, watching her son walk. She made a sound I had never heard her make before. It wasn't words. It was something beyond words. It was the sound of a woman who had been broken by her son's brokenness, now broken again by his healing. She collapsed, not in a way that was dramatic or performative, but in a way that was absolutely real. She sat down because her legs couldn't hold her anymore, and she covered her face, and she made that sound of everything being reordered. I put the mat down. Mat that had been the symbol of everything I was not, everything I could not be. I put it down in my house, and it was just a mat. It had no power. It had never had any power except what I gave it. My father didn't come. I didn't expect him to. Some things don't change even when everything changes. He had decided long ago that I was a burden, and my healing wouldn't change that decision. He had moved beyond me. That was his choice, and I couldn't undo it. But it didn't matter, because something in me had changed that was deeper than my father's rejection or my own pain or the years of paralysis. Something had been said to me that couldn't be unsaid. I had been called son by someone who meant it. I had been forgiven by someone who had the authority to forgive. I had been seen by someone who saw past the paralysis, past the shame, past all the things I had believed about myself, and once you have been seen like that, you can't be invisible again. I could feel it, the old narrative of myself dissolving. The man I had been forced to accept as the truth of who I was, the broken man, the guilty man, the paralyzed man, the invisible man, that man was dead. Not because my legs worked now, but because someone had spoken a different truth about me, and that truth had become more real than the paralysis. I was forgiven. I would carry that knowledge the way I had carried the mat. Everywhere. Always. But it would be light. My sister sat with me as evening came. We didn't speak much. There was nothing that needed to be said. The speaking had already happened. It had happened on a roof and through a hole in the sky and in the presence of a crowd that had witnessed something they would never forget. He stood. I walked to the window. The same window I had stared through for years. The same window that had shown me a world I thought I would never enter. And now I was standing at it on my own legs, looking out at a world I could walk through. It was still the same world, the same streets, the same buildings, the same people. But I was different, and because I was different, the world was different. I had been broken. I had been healed, not by the power of belief, though belief had been part of it. Not by the strength of my friends, though their strength had carried me. But by a word, by a voice that had spoken into the darkness and said, "Son," and said, "Forgiven," and said, "Rise." And I had risen. Not because my legs were strong, but because someone with authority had spoken, and I had believed that. Authority was real. I had believed him, and belief had made me whole. This happened 2,000 years ago, in a house in Capharnaum, through a hole in a roof. But it's not a story that ends there, because the man who spoke, the one who said, "Son," and "Forgiven," and "Rise," he didn't come just for the paralyzed man on the mat. He came for something bigger. Something that reaches across centuries, something that reaches toward you. You are paralyzed too, maybe not in your body, but in your soul, in your belief about yourself, in the narrative you've accepted about who you are and what you deserve. We all are. We all carry mats. Some of us carry the mat of shame, the conviction that we've done something unforgivable, the secret sin that God has seen and counted against us. We believe we deserve to be broken. We believe our brokenness is justice. We look at our paralysis and we see it as punishment, and we accept that punishment because we're certain we earned it. We lie on that mat and we don't try to move. Some of us carry the mat of invisibility. We've learned to take up as little space as possible. We've made ourselves small. We've accepted that the world doesn't see us, and maybe that's fine. Maybe that's all we were ever meant to be. We've stopped asking to be noticed. We've stopped expecting to matter. We've become so good at being unseen that we've forgotten what it feels like to be looked at directly. We lie on that mat and we stop hoping to be recognized. Some of us carry the mat of time. Years have passed. We've accepted that change is no longer possible, that we are fixed in place, that we will be exactly this, exactly as broken, exactly as stuck, exactly as far from wholeness, forever. We've made peace with it. We've learned to manage it. We've stopped imagining anything different. We lie on that mat and we stop imagining. Some of us carry the mat of unworthiness. We know we're not good enough, not smart enough, not strong enough, not the kind of person who gets healed. We're the kind of person things happen to. Bad things, permanent things, things that can't be undone. We look at other people and we see possibility. We look at ourselves and we see fixed limitation. We lie on that mat and we accept our own insignificance. The mat looks different for each of us, but the weight is the same. It's the weight of believing that you are beyond reach, that your brokenness is final, that the story the world has told you about yourself is the true story, that even if there were a healer, even if there were someone with the power to remake you, they would look at you and turn away. They would look at the mat and not at you. They would see your paralysis and not see you. But what if that's not true? What if there is someone who looks past the mat, who looks past your paralysis, visible or invisible, and sees you? Sees the person you are beneath the narrative you've accepted about yourself, sees the potential beneath the brokenness? What if that someone looks at your shame and speaks directly to it? Not to your circumstance, not to your situation, not to the thing everyone else sees, but to the thing that holds you more than anything else. The invisible thing, the guilt, the unworthiness, the belief that you don't deserve to be whole. What if he speaks to that? What if he says, forgiven? Not someday, not if you change, not if you prove yourself, not if you become worthy. Now, already, before you stand up, before you walk, before anyone sees that anything has changed, you are forgiven. And because you are forgiven, you can be made whole, not because your circumstances have changed, not because you suddenly believe in yourself, not because anything external has shifted, not because you've earned it or deserved it or finally prayed hard enough, but because someone with authority has spoken a truth about you that is deeper than your shame, deeper than your paralysis, deeper than the mat you've been lying on, a truth that rewrites everything. And that truth has become real, real enough to stand on, real enough to walk on, real enough to carry your mat, the very thing that held you, and feel how light it is. Because it no longer defines you, because you are no longer defined by your brokenness, because you have been seen by someone who sees past the brokenness and speaks to the wholeness that's underneath. You are whole, not because you deserve it, not because you've earned it, not because you finally believed hard enough, but because someone looked at you, really looked at you, and said, son, recognized your humanity, spoke your name, addressed your hidden shame, and commanded you to rise. And you did. You rose, not because your legs were suddenly strong, but because someone with real authority had spoken, and you believed that authority was real, and belief made you whole. Next, someone ordinary will hear an extraordinary voice, and walk away changed forever. If you want to continue walking through these encounters, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Remain, listen, and walk with us. Because the Nazarene Speaks.